So here we are, 15 points of the Old Testament narrative. We've been going through this. We're on point 13 tonight. And this is 15 key words. If you can memorize these 15 key words, I think you can summarize pretty well to somebody the Old Testament narrative, okay? So I'm going to let the microphone pass around to whoever wants to do this tonight. Okay, maybe not tonight. Next week, maybe. No, you're like, oh, we're not going to be here next week. That's my point. Okay, so, but this is a way from all the stories, all the books, all the prophets, all the priests, of a way to sort of, you can't get every single thing in here, but you can get the big picture. So let me give the big picture to you. Real quick, here we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created all things. They were created good. They were created for His glory, and it was wonderful. He created things in 6 days. On the seventh day, He rested. On that sixth day, He created man, and He created man in His image. It looked like Him. It was supposed to be like Him and represent Him, and everything was perfect in that garden because God made it. Man and Him were walking in perfect intimacy. And then number 2 came along. That's the fall of mankind. Something takes place where now Adam and Eve do not want to listen to the rules of God anymore. They want to come up with their own rules. The one tree they were not supposed to eat from, and they said God is holding something back from us. Satan entices them. They take the bait. They bite. And then all of a sudden they realized this, that after they sinned, that there was shame and blame. They felt dirty, so they covered up, and they blamed one another and even blamed God for their ways. As a result of this, God kicks them out of the garden. But 2 things important happen. He promises there's coming a seed of a woman who's going to come and trample on Satan's head one day, and also take off those fig leaves that you try to cover yourself up in. I'm going to send you out of the garden, but I'm going to send you clothed in garments of skin, right? Which means that someone had to die. Someone had to sacrifice to cover up their guilt and shame. Here's a picture of the coming Messiah who would have to be killed in order to cover up our shame. So as the fall takes place, Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden. They have a couple of kids named Cain and Abel, and you thought your family was dysfunctional. Cain kills his brother Abel, and in the second generation that we see in mankind, and what takes place is that sin just continues to escalate throughout the generations, so much so that God says He's going to send His wrath in the form of a number 3 that's called a flood. Noah and his family are the only ones to survive. And if you were on the inside of the ark, you are safe. If you were on the outside of the ark, you were in danger of God's wrath. God starts over again with Noah and his family, and He puts a rainbow in the cloud and says, I'm never going to visit the earth in my wrath again by flood. Something else will be next time. But I promise this will never happen again. And He says, I want you to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And as mankind continues to increase, and then all of a sudden they decide they're going to build this tower up Babel to reach God. And then all of a sudden God looks down upon this and He scatters them out to different nations. And in Genesis chapter 12, He does number 4. He starts a covenant with a guy by the name of, you might remember? Abraham, right? It started off, his name was Abram, but his name is eventually changed to Abraham. He says, I'm going to bless you so that you would be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. Someone is coming from your family that's going to turn back everything that started in the garden. And Abraham, he believed, and God credited to his account righteousness. He said, okay, since you believe me, I'm going to make you righteous. You're not righteous because of your own good deeds, right? Was Abraham a noble man? No, he was not a noble man. He was a messed up man. He had a lot of problems, and yet because he believed in God's promise of the coming Messiah, God gave him righteousness. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and one of those sons was a kid by the name of Joseph, who Jacob gave a Technicolor dream coat to, and said, hey, I want you to give this wonderful coat of many colors, and because you're my favorite son. And all the other brothers got very jealous that they threw him into a pit after they beat him up. Then they decided to sell him into slavery, and he went all the way into the nation of Egypt. And as he goes into Egypt there, he's mistreated and all kinds of bad things happen. He gets to the lowest of the lowest, and then all of a sudden God promotes him to the second position in all of Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world. And he's the only one connected enough to God to know that a famine is coming, and he needs to stop and preserve some food. And when the famine hits, guess whose family has to come to old little Joseph to get some food? Yep, Jacob, his dad, his brothers, they come alongside, and as Joseph tests them to see if they've changed at all, he sees that there is a change in them, and he welcomes us back in. And all of a sudden, his father Jacob/Israel, the whole nation, moves into the country of Egypt. And they're protected by Pharaoh, and they're protected for a long time until a few hundred years later, when a new Pharaoh is in charge who does not know Joseph, who does not know Israel. All he knows is this: there's a bunch of guys that are ethnically different than us that are a lot bigger than us. And they could create an army, and they could get us in trouble. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to enslave these guys. And he enslaves them and puts them into misery. And the people begin to cry out to God and say, God, will you rescue us? And God starts off number 6 in Exodus. He's going to move them exit out of Egypt through the series of 10 plagues. That 10th plague, once again, being the Passover lamb, that God's people will be spared because of the sacrifice of another. And they are brought out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And Pharaoh has to bow the knee before God. And all of a sudden the people exit out of Egypt. And then at number 7 at Mount Sinai, they get something called the what? Commandments. They get the commandments. Did they get the commandments before they got out of Egypt? Nope, they got the commandments after they got out of Egypt, right? You don't get commandments to earn salvation. You get salvation and then you start keeping commandments, right? It's so important to keep. You're rescued, you're redeemed, you're mine, I'm your father, you're my children. Now you're going to act like you belong to the family now, okay? It's not vice versa. Don't prove yourself to me, but now that I've loved you. And so he gives these commandments to them. Gives 613 commandments. We remember the top 10, and we struggle with the top 10. Can you remember if you had to take care of the rest of the 603, right? So there's a really, really bad situation. And so they don't keep these commandments, and so therefore they get number 8. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years, wandering, trying to find the promised land. And through that time, God shows himself faithful, even though when the people are faithless. And eventually the generations change to where we get down to only Joshua and Caleb are going to lead them into the promised land, which is also number 9, entitled Canaan. This is the promised land. This is what's going to happen. You're going to be able to come into this area. You're going to be able to come into this family and get this. And so Joshua leads the people through military strategy, and they finally are able to acquire the land and start to develop homes and regions and tribes and whatnot. And as Joshua takes off his final hat in Joshua chapter 24, he says, look, I can't tell you what to do anymore, but I can say this. Choose this day whom you're going to serve. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. We've made up our mind. This is how we're going to live. But Joshua's family was only one of the families that did that, because what happens next is a cycle of sin and disobedience we see through the life of the judges. That the people would sin, then God would punish them and bring about suffering in their life. And then as soon as the suffering was bad enough, they would have supplication. That means they would pray to God, say, God, deliver us. And then he would send salvation in the hand of a judge. People like Samson, people like Deborah, people like Gideon. And then as soon as they got out, guess what happened? The cycle started all over again. They just continued to go over and over. And so finally, the people looked at him at number 11 and said, we're going to reject God as our king, and we want a king like the other nations have a king. We want somebody tall. We want somebody strong. We want somebody handsome. We want somebody wealthy. Anything about godly in there? No. We just want them tall. Okay, I'll give you a tall one. Let's find the tallest guy we got. Who we got? And it was King Saul the Tall, who was doing great until he had a mighty, what? Fault. There you go. Okay. And he was doing great until King Saul the Tall saw somebody taller than him and Goliath, and all of a sudden the nation is completely scared to death. And yet there's this little boy up there that's not afraid to fight Goliath. His name is David. And David goes to the battlefield, and he's anointed to be king before he's ever appointed in that position. He defeats Goliath, and his fame begins to increase. And all of a sudden, years and years later, God puts him in that position of leadership as king, and the kingdom is completely instituted. And then all of a sudden, under his son named Solomon, it even grows even stronger. And so the kingdom, under the life of David and under the life of Solomon, now Israel is no longer this little tiny little tribe on the side. They are a major player on the international scene, right? This queen is coming over to go, let me see how this temple works. This king is saying, I want to get this wisdom from Solomon. Like, they are now kind of in a situation, kind of like what Egypt used to be, where they were kind of who people wanted to go to. Now in this kingdom, David and Solomon has raised Israel's stature to an incredible, incredible place. But now we get to this place called the division, which is the kingdom of Israel was going so strong, but so quickly it falls. And so let's look at the division you see on your page there. It says, after the prominence experienced during David and Solomon's reign, the kingdom was divided and gradually descended into a shadow of what the nation was intended to be. Led by many ungodly leaders, the nation drifted further from God's instruction. And so what we're going to see here is that after the kingdom of Saul, David, and Solomon, there's going to be a division that happens in this nation. And no longer is this going to be Israel, but it's going to be Israel and, does anybody know? Judah. Two separate nations. There's going to be a civil war of types that's going to separate these two. And let's show you how these things go together. The division phase of the Old Testament focuses on when Israel endured a civil war of sorts and divided into two nations. Now, while this is not exactly like the Civil War that we would experience here in the United States of America, that's the best term I can have to sort of get you to understand. It's a group of people that somewhere along the way, they said, you know what, we need to separate because we got two totally different ideologies. We want to have this leader, you want to have this leader. And so what used to be 12 tribes of one nation now becomes two distinct nations, the nation of Israel and Judah. The land and people were divided with Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So these, once again, this once strong kingdom that was growing into a major international player, all of a sudden was divided. Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So if you have ever read, especially the book of 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, really, and it goes back and forth, and it'll be like, and then the king of Israel did this, and then the king of Judah did this. The king of Israel led for this many years, and then he died. And the king of Judah did this, and you feel like, my goodness, this is so confusing. You're studying it right. There's so many people, so many different things going on. And what you notice is there's some major themes that we'll look at here. The section is separated by there's a first period experience hostility. In 1 Kings chapter 12, going through chapter 16, what you see is that this first major period in this division stage in Israel's history is really experienced by hostility between Israel and Judah. They've got problems with one another. And so you've got these kings that are going against each other. Pride is raising and a lot of stuff's going up against each other. They refuse to help the other when one of them gets in trouble with a neighboring nation. Lots of kind of hostility among the two. Number two is there is a period of peace that happens. Between 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 29 and 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 29, there's kind of a period of peace that we see throughout these individual leaders and also these nations that somewhat they kind of get along. I would say this, it's kind of like Israel and Judah just kind of get fat and happy at this point. Does it make sense? It's kind of get complacent, everything's okay, we're not having too many issues, and they get really complacent about what's going on. And then the third section is renewed hostilities prior to the fall of the northern kingdom. So, renewed hostilities prior to the fall of the northern kingdom. In 2 Kings chapter 9 through 17, you start to see Israel and Judah get on each other's nerves, like two siblings going at it. And they're going to really sort of jockeying for position, and well, you did this, or we're going to do that to you. There's just a lot of that kind of nonsense that's going on. And so these renewed hostilities prior to the fall of the northern kingdom happen, and it just really gets kind of out of control. Now I want you to turn in your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 12 for a second. If you're looking for 1 Kings, it's before 2 Kings. Okay? Just to help you. Amen. You're welcome. You're welcome. So when you see this, what's going to happen is that Rehoboam, which is after Solomon, is going to come in, and he's going to start to really divide the people. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1 says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, go away for 3 days and come again to me. Now, so the people went away. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them, when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. Now, I don't even have to tell you what's about to happen here. Do you feel like this story is about to turn south really quick? How many of you have regretted that moment where you went to that godly, wise saint in your life and you said, what would you do in this situation? And they would said, I would take a right turn here. And you thought, I thought you would say that. I'll go left, right? How many times has someone had said, this is the wise path, and you thought you were a lot better off than them. You're a lot smarter than them, that they didn't understand things, they couldn't get it. And so with that, you've got to get in your own mindset where you can really think through, can these guys give me the wisdom, right? Eli, you might have to open up that door. It might be locked back there. I'm not sure. Okay. Great. So with this, here comes this opportunity for these guys to come alongside. And so Solomon has died, and Rehoboam is wanting to come in and be that next king. And so he looks at all these guys and says, what should I do? And the old men say, look, Solomon led with kind of a nice, gentle rule, was respectful about the people, just do that. And instead, he went and not listened to those older wise men. He listened to what? His buddies. The buddies that he grew up with when he was coming up along the way. Now, can I just ask you a quick question? Do you have that friend that you grew up with that you got in trouble with all the time? You know what I'm talking about? Like a lot of times I love to talk with like high school students, college students, and say, I want you, this is the experiment that I do with them. I say, I want you to write down the top 5 people that you want to hang out with this weekend. Write it down in the first column. They'll write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Now let me give you another list to go to. I want second column, I want you to give me a list of the top 5 counselors in your life that if you got into trouble, especially with that group on the first list, you'd have to run to and advise for. Okay? Make sense? If you were to trust anybody's counsel, how many of those list the 5 people that you trust their advice? And then you know what I normally ask these students? I'll say, all right, now I want you to tell me how many of those names are on both of those lists. First list, who you hang out with. Second list, who you would go to for advice. And you know what I say? All right, how many of you are the same 5 people are on both lists? Raise your hand. Nobody? Huh. 4 people. Raise your hand. 3. And normally around 2, there's one girl in the back goes, me, like this. All right, 1, few more hands go up, 0 in the majority of the group. And I said, now let me ask you a follow-up question. How many of you have ever gotten in trouble with somebody on your first column that you need to go to get help from somebody on your second column? Raise your hand. Ooh, all the hands go up. And I said to me, so you mean to tell me that some of the people that you're around the most are the ones who've gotten you into trouble the most? And you think that you're going to be okay? 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Your mama was right. She was right. She didn't like Johnny because he was trouble, and he was. And she had a radar, and we wanted to go, Mama doesn't know. He doesn't mean any harm. We're going to be fine. And I'm telling you, I was told this at a very young age. You show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. Yeah. And there is truth there. There is truth. There's a reason why the first psalm in the Bible says, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. I would think Psalm 1:1 would say, worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. No. It says, you want to worship him for 150 psalms? You better get some friends who want the same thing. First verse. You want a lifestyle of worship? You better run with people who want that same type of lifestyle of worship, because if not, they will water you down. They will cause you to be apathetic. And so often what's happening here, we see this in Rehoboam. What's happening is, he is, instead of listening to the wisdom of those beyond him, to those friends that are beyond him, and they're saying, hey man, you're going to be the king now, so we got some advice for you. This will be awesome. Here's what we want you to do. Verse 9, and he said to them, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? Verse 10, and the young men who had grown up with him said to him, thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. If you wonder if Rehoboam is saying something as crass as it sounds, you're right. He's saying, I'm a way bigger man than my father ever will be, and I'll prove it to you. I'll prove it to you. And he absolutely is a horrific tyrant and jerk to the people. You know what happens? His pride causes a division among 2 people. Splits it. Because he listens to his friends rather than those wise people that were beyond him, and had learned a couple things along the way. And so he starts this kingdom, and then eventually, you look down to verse 16, says, when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, what portion do we have in David, we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David. So Israel went to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. And it goes on from there. And so there's this division that takes place among these people. So that first period experienced hostility because of that type of leadership. Eventually, generations later, we have a period of peace that's established. And then eventually there's renewed hostilities prior to the fall of the northern kingdom. Now, here's something that I can't do in the remaining minutes that we have. I don't even know how many kings are listed in the books of Kings and Chronicles, but I guarantee I can give you a list and I can tell you something about each and every single one of them, and by the time we leave today, you will have forgotten them completely, okay? So, but what I want to show you really quick, I want to highlight one prophet and I want to highlight one king for you to sort of see how this kind of works, okay? Because what's happening is these kings are coming in and out of leadership in Israel and Judah. And along the way, there's these prophets that are standing up and saying, hey, I got a sermon to preach so somebody will listen. And so when you look at your table of contents, right? In fact, I want you to do that really quick. Can we turn back in your Bible? One of the first pages there will be the table of contents. Because I want you to see something. This is very, very important for you to get for this next section. And then we're going to look at one prophet and we're going to look at one king that'll sort of help us get an idea on it. So the table of contents should be your favorite page, especially if you're learning your way around the Bible. It's never a shame if somebody says some book in there and you think, I don't know how to find that. Go look it up. There's no shame in it. Habakkuk is tiny, and it's easy to, okay? It's easy to get lost in there. When you look at the Old Testament, I want to make sure everybody here knows this. I was saying this to somebody a few months ago, and I said something about the New Testament, and they raised their hand and they said this. So you mean to imply that there's an Old Testament? And I said, yes, I do. Actually, you're right. And I want to say that because some of you, that's big biblical information that maybe nobody's ever taught you before. And some of you would say, man, I've been knowing there's an Old Testament, New Testament since I was like 9 months old. Man, I know that. And I say that to say, you might have more biblical knowledge than people down the road from you do. So don't ever take for granted what you do have in your knowledge. There's somebody else who doesn't have as much as you do. Take what you've got and teach that to somebody else. You look at the Old Testament there, starts in Genesis, ends in Malachi. Now, I could go through there, and I love to do this exercise with people and say, what's your favorite book out of there? And a lot of people would say Genesis or Psalms or Proverbs. And then I'll also ask and say, all right, now why don't you give me a name of the book that you forgot was actually in the Old Testament, right? And normally what's going to happen is, it's going to be somewhere around Joel down to Malachi. You see those last little section of prophets there? Those are kind of sometimes the forgotten ones. Now, when you look at the very beginning, this will be a refresher for some of you, but this may be new information for some of you. Your Old Testament and your New Testament are not in exact chronological order. And what I mean by that is, a series of time is going like this, and then sometimes it goes, let's stop back here, and we'll go back here, and then sometimes it's like this. And so if you read it, Genesis through Malachi, sometimes you're going to be like, I thought I already read that. Like you're in Chronicles, and you said, I read that one time in Kings. You are? And why is this person over here preaching this sermon? And so what happens is how these things are layered. Genesis through Deuteronomy, those first 5 books are called the books of the law. They instruct the beginning of God's creation and also tell the law about God. And then in Joshua, all the way down to Esther, is what's called the history books. Okay? Joshua through Esther, pretty good. Genesis through Deuteronomy is chronological. Joshua through Esther, pretty much chronological. The only differences there is you see 1st and 2nd Chronicles in that middle section. That is a repeat of a lot of the information in 1st, 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. It kind of summarizes some of the major stories. So it'll tell some of the same stories in a different way. Ezra and Nehemiah come about when they're coming back in the land. Esther is kind of them in exile. You see that word there called Job. Looks like Job, right? Somebody looks at that going, I need to find one of those, right? When you look at Job to Song of Solomon, that's called the wisdom literature. When you look at Job, you go, okay, so does Job happen after Esther? No, most likely Job happens around the time of Genesis chapter 11. Maybe 12. He was most likely a contemporary of Abraham. You go, why would it be all the way back here? Because Job is an individual story about an individual man teaching and learning wisdom that, follow me, make sure you hear what I'm about saying. Job's story doesn't change anything to the big story of the Old Testament narrative. As the people go from here to there, you see what I'm saying? It's an important, biblically inspired, something we need to know. But Job's kind of like it. Job, what happened to Job didn't have anything to do with the people getting up through the Red Sea. You follow me? So it's kind of like, hey, here's an individual story about Job. So he's wisdom literature. Psalms is all about wisdom and worship. Proverbs is wisdom and life. Ecclesiastes is wisdom and just trying to find peace in life. Song of Solomon is wisdom and marriage. And then you get to Isaiah to Malachi. These are called the what? Does anybody remember? The prophets, right? Isaiah through Daniel are called the major prophets. And Hosea through Malachi are called the 12 what? Minor prophets. And why are some major and some minor? The major prophets are major because they're long. That's why. They're just longer than the other ones. Hosea through Malachi are minor. Guess why? Because they're short. They're tiny. Are they not important? No, they're just shorter than the others. So they put these books over here together because they're really long. And they put these other books over here because they're really short. And Isaiah through Malachi, guess what these are? These are collected sermons from prophets who are speaking to things happening back in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. You see how this works? So Jeremiah is going to be a prophet preaching on the corner going, if y'all don't listen, we're going to get destroyed at the end of 2nd Kings. Y'all listen up. And these are a collection of his sermons, but the event is happening over in 2nd Kings. You follow me? So with this, we have this narrative portion in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but also these prophets that come along and they're preaching these messages. These are the books, the sermons, the podcasts of these pastors and prophets standing on the street corners, yelling at everybody, saying, turn or burn. Get right or get left, right? That's what these guys are doing in such an important way. So when we look at it, there's kind of a picture of how all that stuff works together. Now, I want to look for a second about the king's lead. I made you miss it. I don't even have them there. Uh-oh, this is going to freak some of you out. All right, hold on. All right, the king's lead. This section, let me just show you this. You can summarize it your own way. It's a fast-paced section focusing on the rule of kings in both of these areas, both in Israel and Judah. And give me this line here. This is important for you to write down. However the king would lead is often how the people would follow. Okay? Give you an example. You can write down these verses. You don't have to transcribe it there. But 1 Kings 15, 1 through 3. This is what it says. In the 18th year of Israel's king Jeroboam, son of Nebat, became king over Judah, reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. And then listen to this verse 3. He walked in all the sins his father before him had committed. Every king that's mentioned, they start off with a saying like that. They say something like this. He was like his messed up daddy, and he was like him and he led that way, and he lived so often, for so long, and he died. Or there'll be a king that'll say something like this. King Josiah did not walk in the ways of his father, but he turned his heart after the Lord. And guess what would happen when a godly king would try to turn the people around? People would follow. People would follow when there was good leadership in front of the people. And yet sometimes, unfortunately, there would be people who would turn their hearts not towards God, but towards the other idols as well. So let's look at one of the prophets that speaks during this time. Let's look at prophet Elijah. Elijah, like many other prophets, attempted to call God's people back to obedience. So his heart, his job, what he's trying to do is he's calling the people back to obedience, especially at such a crazy time as what they're living in. He is trying to get these people to come back towards obedience. You can turn to the back page and realize this. Elijah's name means Yahweh is my Elohim. Now, some of y'all who were here a few weeks ago, we talked about all the different names in the Bible, and I'm sure that you have remembered every single thing of it. But if you need just a little bit of reminder, El, right? El or Elohim was that generic name for God. Yahweh was the specific name that God gave his people from. Does anybody remember what shrubbery was it? Burning bush. Moses says, hey, bush, Pharaoh's got tons of gods. I don't even know what your name is. You want me to tell him to let his people go? What's your name? And God says, I am who I am. You tell him I am sent you to him. And that name translated, the best that we can tell, was a name by Yahweh. So Elohim is, there's a generic God. Yahweh is the name that we know him by. Some also people would call Yahweh Jehovah. You might have heard that name more often, Yahweh or Jehovah. Basically how you kind of transcribe that there. So when you see a name, when you ever see El in a Bible name like Eli or Elijah or Daniel or Nathaniel, you see those, that El? That's the name Elohim somewhere tucked within that name. And then if you ever see Ayah, like Obadiah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, those names, that is referencing Yahweh in that name. This is why Elijah's name is so awesome. You ready for this? He goes, my God is Yahweh. And you go, y'all didn't get excited about that as I did. Listen, he is saying to a group of people who are straying from Yahweh, who I've got this God and she's got that God and my tribe's got this God. He goes, oh yeah? Well, my God is Yahweh. And my ministry, guess what, is all based around his name. Isn't that something? This is why I think it's so important for people and parents to pray through what they're going to name a child. Because in the Old Testament, you named a child what you wanted to see in their life. You couldn't make it happen, but you were kind of say, hey, here's the goal right here. And so with this, his name shows the type of ministry he would have. This is pretty awesome. Elijah was going to be the type of ministry that he was going to be about, hey, in a nation that has a lot of gods, my God is Yahweh, and I'm going to bring you back to him. Now, some of y'all are going to go home tonight, you're going to start doing a search on what your name means, and you're going to get really depressed. My mother-in-law, one day, she's like, what does my name mean? Beth. I said, it means house. She goes, really? I said, it means house. I'm sorry. But if you say Bethel, it means house of what? There you go. That's a good name. Okay. So like, it can mean these things. Travis, I think, means crossroads. I don't know what that means other than I remember a song when I was in high school by Bones Thug and Harmony. Okay. So anyway, so some of y'all remember? Okay. So that's the only thing that I remember from it. But I can get real spiritual for a second, right? And be like, all right, my life is about to say this. You at a crossroads, you better choose right or choose left. Is that fair enough? Okay, so I can make it that way, right? But in these cases, a lot of times people would name somebody something they wanted to see happen in their life. And so Elijah, I think it's incredible. His name means, out of all the gods out here, mine's Yahweh. And what is the grandest story that we see in his life? Standing in front of 400 prophets of Baal and saying, bring it, boys. My Elohim, your Elohim is Baal, my Elohim is Yahweh. Let's see who wins here. Let's see who wins here. And so that's what takes place. When his nation is turning from God, he speaks out against the sin. He speaks out against the sin. I want you to turn over to 1 Kings chapter 18 now. You have the table of contents. You can find that easy? Amen. That's right. 1 Kings chapter 18. Some of you know this story so well. Some of you, this may be the first time you ever hear it. And this is going to be great for us to look at. Because what happens is, in this time when people are drifting away from the one true God, Elijah is going to be a lone voice who's going to call out and going to bring the people back. He confronts, in this passage here, he confronts the prophets of Baal and wins. The prophets of Baal, Baal was another god that the people were following. And at this point, Elijah is going to confront them in a massive, massive way. Let's, 1 Kings 18, verse 17, says, when Ahab was the king at the time, saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is it you troubler of Israel? You know what he's saying? Hey, I'm trying to lead this free nation where you can worship whoever you want to do, and all you do is keep preaching about Yahweh. I'm tired of listening to it. You're troubling my people. Verse 18, and he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house. Now he's talking about a man's daddy. Listen, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, I love this, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. You ever seen somebody just limping through? Am I going to be this way or am I going to be that way? He says, this is what you're doing in religion. It's like you want to follow God, Yahweh, but you've got this God on the side that you keep running back to. How much longer are you going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? Just make up your mind. Who's it going to be? Nobody's going to answer. Nobody says anything. So verse 22, then Elijah said to the people, now really pay attention to what he's going to say, because it's going to come into play in a second. I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, He is Elohim, right? He is Elohim. And by the way, look back at the middle of that when he says, verse 24, you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the what? Lord. You see the way that Lord is spelled there, all capital letters? What name is that? Yahweh. Whenever you see Lord all capitalized, that's that one covenantal name of God. And he says, okay, you can follow your Elohim, but at the end of this, mine is Yahweh. And so, God who answers by fire, He is God. All the people answered, it is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, oh Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is musing or he is relieving himself. Do I need to translate that for y'all? Okay, make sure you just pay attention now. He's just thinking about something, or he in the bathroom, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out of them. And as midday passed, they raved on till the time of offering the oblation, and there was no voice. No one answered. No one even paid attention. So here these guys go. They screaming, they crying, they go, come on, Baal, come on, Baal. And Elijah go, maybe y'all need to get louder. Maybe he doesn't hear you. He might be on a journey. God, y'all get louder. That's a good idea, Elijah. Come on, everybody, let's get this. And they start cutting themselves to show how serious they are. At this point, they're about to pass out, right? They're losing blood. They've been sweating all afternoon. They've been singing, and nothing's happening at all. And I want to make sure there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Can I just tell you, that is such a great depiction of the gods that we try to follow in this world. You go after them because of what they promise, and yet when you need them, they don't come. The things that you try to put your faith in that is not Yahweh, you waste your time. And at the moment that you need it, you call out and say, deliver me, they have no power. No power. Verse 30. Then Elisha said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. That's just a beautiful statement in itself, isn't it? This thing had been busted up. Why? Because people didn't take care of it. He puts it back together. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. You see, he's trying to even put the nation back together right here. Don't you see that? And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord Yahweh, and he made a trench around the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed, and he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood, and he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. He said, do it a second time. They did it a second time, and he said, do it a third time, and they did it a third time, and the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also the water. You ever tried to make a log burn that's been wet out in the rain? It's not happening, is it? Drench it 3 times, 12 buckets of water? Come on, man. You imagine these prophets of Baal going, this guy's an idiot. Hey, look, Baal may not answer us, but even if his God answers him, he can't burn that wood up, right? Not a chance. And verse 36, and at the time of the offering of the sacrifice, oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Yahweh, Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are Elohim in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your words. Answer me, O Yahweh. Answer me, this people may know that you, O Yahweh, are Elohim. There's his name right there, Elijah. Yahweh Elohim. And that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of Yahweh fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, Yahweh, he is Elohim. Yahweh, he is Elohim. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Now, this is pretty incredible what takes place. Now, Elijah stares down these prophets trying to tear the people of God away from the true worship of God, stares them down the face, and he says, even I only am left. The only prophet left, and I'll take you boys on. And he wins, which is pretty remarkable. Now, look over to chapter 19 for a second. Chapter 19, verse 1. King Ahab told his wife Jezebel. By the way, there's a reason why you ever heard of a woman who seems crazy, they call her Jezebel. If you ever meet a woman, don't go there. Okay, don't even, like, nope, sorry, we're done. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. All right, now look, the man just took on hundreds of prophets by himself. What is one crazy woman going to do to Elijah? I'm expecting Elijah to go, bring it, Jezebel. I'll take you and your whole household on. I just took down all your prophets. You think I'm scared of you? Look what happens next. Verse 3. Then he was afraid. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Yahweh, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Hold on a second. I want you to get this picture in your head. After this experience, he is depressed and suicidal. Now, I know in church we often talk about spiritual highs and valleys and lows and whatnot. I don't know if there's a more mountaintop experience than what Elijah just experienced. Fire of God falling down, taking up this sacrifice, licking up the water, taking out all these hundreds of prophets. I would think I'd at least be about invincible for about 2 months from now, right? Like anything, like how could you just divorce everything that just happened from that moment, and then all of a sudden some woman saying, I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow, and he's at the point of suicide? And that seems so shocking, except some of you know exactly how it feels. Up here one day, down in the valley the next. And you go, how do we fall that quick? Like, how in the world do we fall? Well, guys, I mean, when you look at it, they got fatigues going on, there's fear going on, there's faithlessness going on, frustration going on. And here's the thing. Look what happens. Verse 5. He lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Oreb, the mount of God. Mount Oreb is also known as Mount Sinai, place where the Ten Commandments originally came, and the fire came down that. Now, follow this. If I'm God, and Elijah's my servant, and he's now gotten fearful of this woman, and he wants to die, the last thing I'm thinking about doing is sending one of my angels to cook this brother breakfast. And in this you see the grace and the mercy of God that he just keeps giving. Even a second time, I can imagine the angel, you want me to do what? I think Elijah needs a swift kick somewhere. I don't think he needs breakfast. God gives him breakfast. Why? Because the journey is too great for you. And I think some of us, we need to know tonight the journey is too great on your own, that you need the help and the provision of the Lord at every single turn. It comes along, and yet he goes 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai. What is he looking for? Another mountaintop experience. I got to have that experience, God. I got to have those feelings. I got to see your power. And look what happens next. Verse 9. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Have you ever heard Elijah say that? Yeah, a few days before, he was bragging about he was the only prophet left and that he would take them on. And now, he's complaining about it. My boast today can become my complaint tomorrow if I don't watch it. What I put my strength in and boast about here, if I'm not careful, is what's going to take me down later. So what happens? We got to move quick. Okay. It says, verse 11, he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And I'm going to have to stop there just for time. But do you see what's happening? God is saying, I'm not always in those big moments, son. You're looking for the fire. You're looking for the earthquake. You're looking for this. You better get close enough where you can hear me whisper. You better be that close. And you better not be dependent upon all those big mountaintop experiences because they only come every so often. You better learn how to walk with me in the valley, listening to me close enough where you can hear my heart. So in this, we see this incredible moment through Elijah, through this great moments. And his earlier boast is the same as his later complaint. I am the only one left. And so we see in this moment of Elijah greatness, but also very much weakness. Now, we got to go to King Josiah in 7 minutes, so we're going to move. While many kings turned away from the Lord, there were some like Josiah who led the people back to obedience. He led the people back to obedience. We're going to look at 2 Kings chapter 22. Josiah is one of my favorite kings in the Bible because of what he did here. Josiah became king of Judah at 8 years old. All right, how many of you know somebody around 8 years old in your life right now? Raise your hand. How many of you would be scared to death if that 8-year-old was put in charge of thousands upon people, right? Scared to death. And he's king because dad's king. And okay, we'll let you be king. Let's see how you're going to do, boy. You talk about fear, right? He became king at the right age of 8. But with this, he is the prime kingly example of how a godly leader can turn things around. The nation is so low, so messed up. God has basically all but promised, you guys are going down. And yet, because of what happens, Josiah, something miraculous is going to take place, and he knows this. I don't have much time left, and this may not affect me, but I'm going to do what I can to save those around me. And so, under his reign, the book of the law was rediscovered in the temple. Under his reign, the book of the law was rediscovered in the temple. And you go, rediscovered, you mean they lost it? Apparently so. Apparently they had. God's people were trying to live for God without his book. 2 Kings chapter 22 verse 1. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedediah, the daughter of Adaiah, Bozkath. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the way of David his father, and he did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And you might say, was David his immediate father? Nope. Whenever they say he walked like David, it's pointing back to a man after God's own heart. That's the kind of king he's going to be. Look at verse 3. In the 18th year of King Josiah, the king sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, son of Meshullam, the secretary, to the house of the Lord, saying, go up to Hilkiah the high priest, that he may count the money that has been brought into the house of the Lord, which the keepers of the threshold have collected from the people. And let it be given into the hand of the workmen who have the oversight of the house of the Lord, and let them give it to the workmen who are at the house of the Lord, repairing the house. So he's basically saying this, look, I need you to go into the temple, count the money, we need to do business here, okay? We're not thinking about anything else. Look down in verse 8. And Hilkiah the high priest sent to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. And Shaphan the secretary came to the king and reported to the king, your servants have emptied out the money that was found in the house and have delivered it to the hand of the workmen who have the oversight of the house of the Lord. Then Shaphan the secretary told the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read it before the king. Now, what is this book of the law? He started in Genesis and he ended up in Deuteronomy. All right, we found this book. Blow the dust off. Why don't you read it to me? I like ancient books. Tell about our people. All right. He reads about God's creation. He reads about God's provision. He reads about God's deliverance. And he says, you shall have no other gods before me. And he goes, uh-oh. He starts looking around the palace at every god and every statue all around. And he goes, we're in trouble here. And then he starts reading about promises in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy about if you follow after the ways of God, what God's going to do. And Josiah realizes how much in danger they are. Look what happens, verse 11. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes. And the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, and Ahikam the son of Shaphan, and Achbor the son of Micaiah, and Shaphan the secretary, and Asaiah the king's servant, saying, go inquire of the Lord for me, and for the people, and for all Judah, concerning the words of this book that has been found. For great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book, to do according to all that is written concerning us. So they go in, they pray, they talk about it. Verse 16, thus says the Lord, behold, I will bring disaster upon this place and upon its inhabitants. All the words of this book that the king of Judah has read, because they have forsaken me and have made offerings to other gods, that they might provoke me to anger with all the work of their hands. Therefore my wrath will be kindled against this place, and it will not be quenched. But to the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of the Lord, thus shall you say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, regarding the words that you have heard, because your heart was penitent, and you humbled yourself before the Lord, when you heard how I spoke against this place and against its inhabitants, that they should become a desolation and a curse, and you have torn your clothes and went before me, I also have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore, behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace, and your eyes shall not see the disaster that I will bring upon this place. And they brought back word to the king. Now, so get this. Josiah reads the book. He realizes they're in trouble. Sends the priest. Go pray to the Lord. See what he says. We'll make changes, God. We promise we'll change things around. Here's what the word comes back. The word comes back like this. Josiah, God is very angry with this sin. He's going to punish the nation. Basically, we're going to be flatlined by a pagan nation. We're going to be exiled. But because you are humble and repentant, God's going to wait until you die in peace before it happens. Josiah, you won't have to live to see this. It's coming, but not under your watch. Because you were humble and repentant, you won't have to see it. So you know what? If I'm Josiah, I'd be like, sweet, okay, right? Hey, that's all I care to hear. I don't have to deal with that. Wonderful news. And so you mean to tell me that just because my heart was penitent, I don't need to make a change? That's awesome, God. Thank you for that. I'm going to go live on my way. Not Josiah. Look what happens next verse. Then the king sent, and all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem were gathered to him. And the king went up to the house of the Lord, and with him all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests and the prophets, all the people, both small and great. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that had been found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people joined in the covenant. And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second order and the keepers of the threshold to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels made for Baal, for Asherah, for all the hosts of heaven. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. And he deposed the priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in the high places. And it's going to go on down from there over and over and over. But you know what happens here? They are literally taking statues of other gods outside of God's temple. And Josiah says, bring them out. And he breaks them. Then he burns them. Then he makes the priest drink them. And then all of a sudden, when that stuff that they took in their system and it is expelled out of their system, then he's going to go and do something with that stuff, and he continues to desecrate it and desecrate it and desecrate it and say, this is the filth that you've been worshiping. Touch it again, I dare you. And he's been promised he's not going to deal with God's wrath, and still he's trying to spare them from idolatry. You know why? Because some of us have to realize that it may be in your lifetime you see things, but some of the stuff you're going to do is going to have an effect on future generations. You might be long and gone, and yet you are saving people from further calamity. It's not just about you and your condition. It's about those who come behind you. And so, upon reading it, King Josiah made sweeping changes to avoid God's wrath. And Josiah is going to die before the exile comes, but he is going to do everything in his proper context to say this: God's wrath may be coming, but I'm going to spare as many people as I possibly can. I want them to see the glory of the hope of God. Can I just tell you something right now? You may be feeling like Josiah, and you look at where our nation is and where God's people are, and you think, man, we are in trouble. You ever feel that way? You look at the situation and you go this. And some of you have even heard, you've thought this argument, or you've heard somebody say this: man, I don't even want to bring children into this world for the mess that they're going to inherit, right? A lot of people talk like that. And here's the thing. You can say, well, look, I'm about to die. I don't have anything to do with this. Who knows what this world's going to be in a few decades from now, but it's not my responsibility. It is our responsibility, church. It is our responsibility to do everything we can to tear down every single idol that is left in the house of God and say we are going to worship Yahweh and worship Him only. And we're not going to let this filth taint our homes, our churches, the people that we love. And with our breath, even if we're not going to experience the wrath, we want to bring as many people along as we can and say you don't have to experience it either. And so, Father...